All right, guys, welcome to Hitachi Digital Services Lisbon Center. Why don't we do a quick introduction? Anthony?
Well, firstly, thank you for putting on the British weather for us.
Absolutely.
I think the winds must be 40, 50 miles an hour outside. It's been raining all day, so I feel at home. I'm Ant Drake. I'm the partner responsible for ISG's UK, Ireland, and Nordics business. So I look after all of our enterprise clients across those regions. I'm with the firm ISG, been with the firm for 13 years, and I suppose the big thing that I do in my job and what got me to the position that I'm in is shaping, leading, negotiating, and closing large-scale outsourcing contracts or transformation deals between enterprise clients and service providers. So that's me, and I've joined with my dear colleague Rakesh.
Indeed, I'm Rakesh Parmeshwara, so I'm a director at ISG. And I would actually like to say sorry because I brought the British weather to Portugal. So there you go. So Ant, I'm also focused on advising our clients through complex sourcing initiatives and transformation programs. The way I like to see my role is I'm just a facilitator. I like to understand what our clients' problem statements are and then collaborate with the provider community and our ISG Hive to try and see how we can solve them. I focus on the UKIN market and the Nordics. I look after our BFSI practice. That's
Great.
really what my role is.
Good to have you here. Good. So why don't we start from a market point of view? So every quarter, ISG runs its index, which looks at APAC, EMEA, and the Americas on all sourcing and technology trends. For us, Lisbon obviously is core for a lot of the nearshore delivery we do in EMEA, but it's also important for countries outside of the region because it serves as a good central location, from a geographic point of view. So we, serving countries, having done so through Africa and the Middle East, the Nordics, and so on. But what are we seeing in EMEA from the last index in terms of the most recent trends and highlights from both a contract point of view, but also some of the tech work you're seeing?
Okay, so EMEA, obviously interesting market right now. I wouldn't say it's the easiest market to be in. There have been times over the last 5-10 years when work has come much more actively than it feels like it's coming right now. As you say, we've got this thing called the ISG index, and for the last 21 years, it's done a broad assessment of where the money is going, which industries are making what kind of buying decisions, where's growth, where's retrenchment happening. Over the last year or so, there's been a bit of EMEA actually did okay over the last year. I think growth over the last 12 months was in the region of about 3-4% on an overarching outsourcing perspective. So that incorporates both IT outsourcing, but also business process outsourcing, BPO representing about 20% of the market.
Got it.
So growth of about 3-4% in EMEA, but that top level sort of hides what's going on underneath it. So the different regions are behaving very differently. The UK actually pulled back quite a lot last year. So there was softness in the UK market, whereas in 2023, it represented 27% of the, in 2023, it represented about 34% of the overall EMEA market. In 2024, it was only 27%. And that was because we had seen a rebalancing of things. Germany, which had had a particularly soft 23, kind of came back in 2024. Now, that's the backward-looking lens on things.
Yeah.
But, the people here today are probably, they care more about, well, where's things going? Where do I need to be focused on in the future? We're forecasting about a 4% growth overall for the market. So pretty
for
similar.
the entire region.
For the entire region, yeah. We haven't broken that down by different countries, but I'll tell you that the UK market will be tough this year. There's a lot of clients in the UK, particularly in the retail CPG space, have been hit by some taxation changes, which is it's really affecting their cost base. So the free cash, which is there for transformation initiatives, perhaps less there. Is going to be more on a what must I do rather than what would I like to do. UK will be tough. And then I think if you look at the geopolitical situation in Germany and France, we've got elections in both of those countries. We know that always provides a bit of a break on spending for clients because the entire system associated with it pulls back a bit. So I think elections in Germany are Q1, is it Q2 in France?
Yeah.
I can't quite remember. But so I think softness in the first half of the year, we'd expect it to pick up through the second half of the year. And then through all of this, there's a lot which will be driven from the US and whatever happens in the US. So we'll just have
Whatever
to wait.
happens in the
We'll
US.
just have to wait and see how. I'm going to be I'm playing this one down the line.
We'll
have
our
to see
best.
what happens there.
Okay, so in terms of some of the industries, so you mentioned retail, BFSI, any commentary around that?
Yeah, no, I think just to Ant's point, there's a lot of macro factors affecting sectors. So BFSI is no different. I think it has struggled compared to some of the other industries in the recent past, and that's because of the headwinds. So, although the interest rates being high helped the retail side of the picture, it hasn't helped the other side of the business, right? And I think that's why BFSI overall has seen a reduction in the footprint and a lot more consolidation happening. And I think that's not surprising. And I think while there was an expectation that 2025 was going to bring in a lot of quantitative easing, more liquidity into the market, that hasn't really quite materialized because of some of the sanctions that Trump's talking about. There's a lot of currency devaluation as well. US dollar being so strong, I think it's really affected the market. So I think 2025 continues to be conservative, in terms of outlook. If there are certain macro tailwinds, headwinds, I think we will see a picture change, but it really depends. So in a nutshell, consolidation is the key mantra within the BFSI community right now. Having said that, there is one sector, which is insurance, is seeing a bit of transformation happening. I think insurance
we would agree with that based on our work.
Insurance seems
Indeed.
super hot right now.
It is. So we're seeing a lot of traction and transformation happening in the insurance space. A lot of investments on Gen AI actually being brought to fruition.
Yeah.
So it's not just pilots, it's actually things in production that we're seeing on the back office side. And that's really what energized the sector. So I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg piece with banking struggling, but some optimism still there in the market. Insurance really being a bit more bullish compared to some of the other sectors.
There's one thing that, we've got this super recent use case with COVID where, and there are some parallels, right? There was massive retrenchment in COVID, but you saw that the organizations that really thrived coming off the back end of it were the ones that continued to invest, that continued to build new solutions, build new technology, build a deeper customer consumer base.
Which wasn't easy for a lot.
Which wasn't easy. I mean,
Yeah.
it took a lot of guts to say, my demand's fallen off a cliff and the money's not there, but I need to continue to invest.
Right.
And I think, there's kind of a parallel with the Gen AI, agentic AI, the pace at which AI is happening at the moment. Companies aren't really, if you look back to COVID, I can't just sit still, sit on my hands and not do anything and wait for this to play out. I am going to have to act. So, there's a lot of people here, obviously, who focus on bringing the best of Hitachi Digital Services to their clients. I think the best thing that you can be doing is bring the innovation day in, day out, bring that new idea to say, hey, I don't really know where this is going, but I've had a thought and I've seen this use case over there, and I think it might be relevant for you, because that will keep you at the front of your clients' minds.
I was thinking about COVID, asking you that when you were talking about some of the slowdown and pullback. And part of me is you answered it by talking about taxation, policy, geopolitics playing a role. I remember 2 years ago, COVID was the only reason for the lack of change.
Yeah.
When is that going to be over? And these other issues that are now happening are going to be at the forefront. I mean, are we ever going to say that, well, because of COVID, X, Y, Z? Are you seeing a lot of that?
Well, but if you think about it, it was such a massive shift for society, and we all lived through this bizarre scenario where we're not allowed to leave our house. There were times when you literally weren't allowed to leave your house. And I think the mark that leaves on our psyche, it will live with us forever. So we will, the people of our generation, we will always view work through the lens of this COVID time.
Right.
In terms of the economic situation, so that's the kind of societal legacy that it'll leave. The economic legacy will live with us for quite a while. I mean, the quantitative easing and the amount of money that was pushed into those debts come due, and you look at the debt that the UK government has got right now. It's a very tough situation. Same goes for Germany, France, a lot of the European economies. So it's going to be a tough situation to kind of cope with, and I think it'll be a multi-decade issue to get on with, but it just represents the new normal now.
Now, you mentioned the Nordics. I want to just round out sort of this market assessment. Nordics historically have been an area for the India heritage firms investing a lot of money per country where they want to be active.
Yeah.
What are you seeing in that region now, and does it differ by country?
Yeah, I think Nordics is an interesting case in point. I think our key observation, at least my key observation, is really Nordics is a lot more localized. So the Indian heritage providers actually have not got the traction that they have seen in the rest of the European market. And that's because the Nordics buyers are generally more affiliated to work with localized resources who get the culture, who get the grasp of the market. Because
that somewhat throws through the Benelux too, right? That sort of thinking.
It does.
Super consensus driven.
Yeah.
Less so than other regions where it's more directed from on high. This is the decision. This is the direction that we're going. I remember a story that there was a former head. There was a guy who I was working with who was the head of the UK for one of the Indian heritage firms. He had previously had a role of the head of the Nordics, and he was telling me a story about he had had a meeting with the CEO of a large Swedish company, and it was the final presentation, final pitch. He got the guy. The CEO said, "Yep, this looks good." And he's over the moon. He's fantastic. The CEO said yes. And the CEO says, just talk to my colleague tomorrow and we'll take it from there. And he goes and has a talk with the colleague the next day, and the colleague who's the procurement director says, okay, but why would we do this? And my friend says, well, your CEO's just said that we're going to do this. And he says, well, I take that as important guidance, but not a decision.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of indication of how it is to do business in Sweden, Denmark.
Yeah. And I think there's an important parallel. There will be exceptions, right? There will be big banks like Deutsche Bank who need to raise money, who needs to transform the captive centers in India. And they are happy to work with providers who can partner with them through that. So there's been a big case study, which thankfully we've been involved. So ISG led this sourcing initiative on behalf of Deutsche Bank, which is a publicly available case study, right? It was just an example of 500 million transaction in the market that we kind of advised behind the scenes and helped, shape the captive transfer to a service provider who will now take on a 500 million transaction, do a digital transformation and get the step change required.
Yeah.
And that's the trust that needed to be built. And in this case, they were able to build the trust through the process that we helped run. And that's really a good
about
example.
Consensus, though. That was a deal that took 2 years to shape and negotiate. Now, a $500 million deal, it's a very large one. I can't remember exactly how many people were in scope, but I think it was sort of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of complexity there. But in other markets, that might be something that flows through more quickly because you have the direction from above that says, this is where we're going. It still took 2 years to shape. We try to get things done a little bit quicker usually, but still a very transformative deal.
Yeah. So I think the consensus in the Americas about BFSI, particularly BFS, and maybe even more so on the FS side, is that it's very third generation outsourcing. So they're not overly interested in looking at vendors that would be considered challengers.
Yeah.
On the B side, the banking portion, there's certainly a lot of opportunity in the tier 2 world for a Hitachi Digital Services. Yep. We have a couple clients in that space within the Americas who are doing sort of very end-to-end work there. In the insurance side, you guys know how the spending is tough there in the U.S. Year over year, that changes. So my point here is, from a BFSI perspective, is the third generation still the right categorization of their sourcing models, where it's a lot harder for a tier 2 to make an impact there?
I think it depends on what your differentiator is. The transformation that we're seeing from Gen AI, agentic AI, and how that can transform service delivery in two different models, both making the underlying core services that you deliver more efficient, better cost point, better quality of service, better customer satisfaction. It's a very important one. If you can differentiate on that message, you'll be in that conversation. Second point is how you're able to use that to make the bank's operations more effective. Now, the big question there is the regulation and the extent to which banks are willing to take that kind of risk in the regulatory environment, in the fine structure that can be applied. That's the challenge that applies to them. So the way that I see it is you can break into that space if you've got a differentiated message, but it is tough to break onto the PSLs that these banks have. They do seem to be retrenched into I'm comfortable working in this way.
Yeah. Completely aligned. And what we are seeing though as well is some of the mature banks, the tier ones, do have a secondary PSL.
Yeah.
So they have a primary PSL for some of the tier one vendors and secondary PSL for some of the niche vendors to come and play a part. So there's definitely space for everyone to play. I guess that's the high-level message. And if you look at the insurance space, there's a lot more there to play.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that we've often associated insurers is, they usually have a global footprint. They're very regulatory-driven businesses, and therefore are very risk-averse.
Yeah.
More so than the banks, which is surprising. Which has meant that they are actually not on the maturity of outsourcing on the same power as the banks. So they're actually second, third generation, or sometimes even first generation as a result, which means there's a lot more opportunity to step change, which means, more space for players like yourself to be part of the ecosystem to make the change from the forefront.
No, that's great to hear, because insurance is a much bigger play in EMEA for us than it is in the US.
Can I because we've just been running a deal which was won by a tier 2, tier 3 even supplier, and they were competing up against a tier 1. Right? Tier 1 was winning on price point.
Sure, always.
They won on price point, fine. But the tier 2 brought a bunch of kind of AI monitoring, alerting, observability, tools and capabilities that the tier 1, which you think, with their size and scale, they should be bringing that to the forefront, just weren't bringing. So although they were at a higher price point, clients said, well, actually this, I can tell that the customer service is going to be better.
Sure.
Coming with this tier 2, tier 3, they made the decision to go with the tier 2, tier 3, despite the price and the kind of scale benefits of going with the tier 1. So this is how you got to customize your messaging to the client to make sure that you're bringing the best of Hitachi digital services every time.
Yeah. One of the things I always say internally when we market a lot of the work that we have done externally, so whether it's a position in a report or some sort of thought leadership that we co-publish with an ISG, is your success is our success. And I target that message towards all of our delivery teams, because to your point, the service delivery now, especially as a tier 2, is super important, if not the number one credential for us to get access to an enterprise. And all the great work that the team does in Lisbon is credited, and it's manifesting itself in our external perception.
Yep.
So are you seeing that more from clients, that they want to know not just the strategy and the model, but they actually want to meet the people doing the work? They want to understand that service delivery. And this may be a generational shift too.
It's actually the foundation for winning larger deals, right? So especially at your size, part of the value prop is, take a low risk with us. We'll do a bit of piece, here or there, and we're going to delight you, because the team that we've got here in Lisbon are fantastic. They'll understand you. We work to the same time zone. They've got great skills in terms of mapping out what your future might be. And we might start on a small scale, but you'll get a feel for the capability that we've got as an organization, and also the culture that we've got in terms of putting you first. So,
some of them
when I think about this team, this is the foundation for your on-sell and your out-sell, which is so critical.
Some of them have been here longer than the three of us have been working.
Yes.
So that's always a good sign when it comes to the maturity of your service delivery. What are you seeing around some of the tech stuff now? Now, let's not start with AI, just park that for a minute? Because obviously some of the areas that we focus on, cloud with relationship to HARC
Yep.
and the application reliability center that we've talked about, what are you seeing in terms of cloud transformation work? Is that still happening? Is on-prem, hybrid, public, private? What's the...
I can take that one. So absolutely, the infrastructure space is rife with transformation. Taking out tech debt is one of the key agendas across the board, which means there is a absolute thrust towards digital transformation that touches all parts of the business, and therefore cloud is a big enabler to make that happen. I think what we're seeing is a lot of the clients are, well ahead in the cloud transformation piece. Having said that, they've realized cloud hasn't really delivered the outcomes that was promised at the onset.
Sure.
The 40% cost reduction hasn't really materialized because
Slightly.
Indeed. And that's because there's been a lack of governance. There's a lack of FinOps. There's just a lack of understanding of the consumption and the demand. And I think that's what we're seeing a pivot towards. Maturity around governance, controls, implementation of a robust FinOps, multi-cloud orchestration.
Sure.
Not just a Microsoft house or a Google house. I think there's a general tendency for the business. In fact, that's a good point, right? If you look at the insurance houses, you have 50% of the organization that's centralized under the CIO, and there's roughly around 50% which is under the business, the shadow IT. And one of the things that we've often noticed is the CIO has some control over the cloud piece, but actually the business doesn't really have much control. Therefore, their budgets really being mismanaged overall. And that's really the big opportunity play for a lot of providers, especially for Hitachi, right? Where multi-cloud, orchestration, robust FinOps, governance are all the key themes that resonate with the clients.
The other point is that the position that you occupy in the market lends itself well to working with, however we want to define it, mid-market is the term that people often use, but it feels trite to call an organization that's 5 or 10 billion in revenue mid-market. They're clearly much bigger than mid-market.
Sure.
But they may not have the same maturity that, an organization at 50 billion in revenue or 80 billion in revenue is going to be at. So
generally there's a longer legacy too.
And there's a longer legacy, exactly. And you look at the Mittelstand in Germany and a lot of that kind of level of organization in the UK, they haven't necessarily been they haven't reached the tipping point where they've needed to transform until more recently. So I think you occupy a nice position to support those organizations with their cloud transformation. The other piece that's worth remembering or worth knowing about this is that when we look at the market overall, where the IT spend was going 5 years ago, 2019, I suppose that's 6 years ago now, 63% of the spend was going on infrastructure. And the balance, the 37% was going on apps. That's completely flipped over the last 6 years. So now 63% of spend is going on apps with 37% going on infrastructure. Something to be aware of when you're working with your clients, that's where the money's going these days.
What about ERP? What are we seeing there with, is there a reprieve on S4 transformation? Because I know, again, the US...
Not enough skills to satisfy the demand that's out there in the market.
And are you seeing both SAP and Oracle, Workday, Dynamics? I mean, what's...
The biggest workload at the moment is SAP, obviously, just with the situation that's going on there. That's the one where providers don't have enough skills. Quite frankly, all of the consulting organizations don't have enough skills to satisfy this sort of tidal wave of demand that we're seeing and the complexity that's associated with it, the amount that it touches operations and tech systems. So SAP's the big one right now.
You're doing a lot of advising around how to figure that out, or do you feel like some of these shops understand what they need to do? It's really just a question of doing it.
No, I don't think anyone really understands what they're supposed to. And it's so multifaceted, right? Because it goes all the way from the business process, reimagining the business process at the front end, through to finding the right SI, negotiating your license agreement with SAP, figuring out if you're going to go with RISE or on-prem, and what's the TCO, what's the total cost of ownership analysis with, and this is just huge complexity that clients don't really understand. And then what's your AMS wrapper if you don't go down the RISE route? And what's my cost base for that going to look like? And by the way, whilst I'm doing all of that, how do I manage the change in my organization for a system change from ECC 6 to S4? You know, there's just, the complexity is vast with this one, and it needs to be knitted together very, very carefully. I was asked by a client, we were pitching for an ERP transformation deal, and they said, you know, how many of these things have you done? I said, we've done loads. And they said, and how many of them have run to time? And I said, I'll be honest with you, none of them have run to time. Because every time you get into a client environment, you uncover something that you didn't know.
Sure.
Yeah. And the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. That saying has never been truer than in an ERP transformation. But if you're able to bring, you know, the engineering heritage that you've got, the understanding of business processes, the understanding of operational processes, you know, that can be a real differentiator for you, especially in the sort of SI piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, just to add to it, I think a lot of the ERP agenda is actually led by, you know, the SAPs of the world with their roadmaps and their deadlines. I think a lot of the clients are having to just work to that roadmap. Like the S4HANA migration, there is a timeline, there is a ticking time bomb that they need to respond to. And I think that's really the key. So it's one of those cases where there's a lot of constraints, working to an ERP roadmap, and more importantly, choice. You can't just get out of a SAP ecosystem if you're part of it, because getting out, the lock-in is just, you know, just there, right? So I think that's really what they're dabbling with. And you have similar things on the ServiceNow side. We're seeing a lot of traction on the ServiceNow ecosystem coming in on the service management operations side, which is really interesting, because we're seeing a lot of investments across the board from the provider community as well to build IPs and accelerators on that ecosystem, because they see that as the bet for the service space. So you can think of ERPs in different contexts, but you know, there are different products out there to solve different problems, and therefore, it's just working through it.
One of the things moving around that's key for Hitachi globally has been sustainability. Not selling it, sure, but practicing it because of our OT side of the business has been extremely important. You know, in terms of, you know, everything from being at Davos to COP, whatever the next number set is, to having a very rigid sustainability leadership team and practice that permeates through all the businesses. But we also sell sustainability services, right? Like I think everybody does. Dedicated web pages from some of the providers just on ESG work. What are you seeing?
I can go for it. So, having also worked in the consumer space for a while, you know, we do know there's been research and studies which says certain consumers are happy to pay a bit of a premium on sustainable goods. Having said that, I think with high interest rates, with miscellaneous spend being cut, consumers' habits changing? I think so. And I think that's a true reflection. I think what we're seeing in the market is there's a bit more pivot towards regulation-led sustainability. So, you know, clients are having to do certain things, like the DORA regulations in the UK has forced insurance and BFS clients alike to regulate the supply chain, to be on top of third-party risk management. So there is absolute legal mandate to make sure there's certain controls in place, and that's happening. There's the public sector side of the equation where ESG is fundamental to sourcing, and therefore there's still, you know, up to 10% weightage aligned to public sector for ESG
social value
evaluation. So EcoVadis scores do matter in certain procurements, especially public sector, but does it really matter in the retail and consumer space in the IT side? Only in the initial pre-qualification stage, not as much as the process evolves and builds.
So I'll answer it, I think, somewhat similar but slightly differently. I'm going to answer this from a position of what the data tells me and what my empirical, you know, what my experience is. And you shouldn't read into this whether I think that's right.
Noted.
No. What I'm seeing is less demand come through the pipeline from enterprise clients for ESG projects. It was something that was talked about an awful lot, I would say 2, 3, 4 years ago. And the volume of conversations that we have as advisors, where a client is saying, I want to go on, I need to implement this kind of new ESG solution. I need to understand my water consumption better. I need to optimize this or that, my carbon footprint. I'm having fewer of those conversations. Now, it may be just because this has become status quo and it's embedded into everything that we do, because there was a time when it felt like it was its own distinct thing.
Sure.
Whereas, more often it now seems to be embedded into solutions. But rightly or wrongly, I think there's fewer of those distinct conversations happening.
Okay, interesting. Now, one of the areas that we would apply to sustainability would be in the IT/OT space,
right.
A big area for us,
yeah.
Especially with what we characterize as these mission-critical systems, from some of what Ajith, one of our senior IoT leaders, was referring to. So we know that IoT deals are not structured like ITO deals, but we're seeing a lot of demand because of this convergence that's happening.
Yeah.
Can you reflect a little bit on?
Well, so I think it's super interesting. I mean, one of the case studies that we had earlier today, when you showed me one of the digital twins, that's actually a great use case for the ESG and the sustainability, and your ability to model. Okay, well, theoretically we make this change. What does that do to our output? What does that do to our carbon consumption? What does that do to our water consumption? What does that do to what we're emitting? I think that's a super interesting use case. Now, making that a commercial deal, that is very different to an IT outsourcing deal. The way that those kind of deals get shaped, there's much more done around co-solutioning and workshopping and building proof of concepts as part of the deal than an ITO deal, which might just be a case of, right, what are your references? Where have you done this for? So I think you've got to be able to build it a little bit more. And from what I've seen, you can build it, you can scale it pretty impressively.
And so asset-light industries, what you look after, there's not a whole lot of IoT work happening there. But does anything pop up from sort of the insurance side, perhaps?
Yeah, not
or the retail side. I mean, some of the shelf monitoring.
Yeah,
stuff.
Indeed. I think there's always going to be IoT kind of stuff or OT stuff that happens in the retail and consumer space, right? You still have your warehouses, your back office functions that need to be optimized.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, yes, there's a lot of change that happens in that space. If you look at the retail, there's heavy investment in robotic fulfillment, robotic warehouses. So it just takes a different form and shape, but there's absolutely a lot of modernization happening, a lot of investments happening in trying to make sure the entire back office is optimized.
I'll jump in quickly on one thing. It's your point is a really good one. And one of the stories that we've talked about today is one of the organizations that you work with, and they've come up with this spectrometer for eyes, or being able to understand eyes better, whatever it is. But the super interesting thing about this is, through the collaboration between you and your client, you realize that there's a different use case for that, and it might be applied to food. Can it be used to prevent food wastage? I mean, that's exactly the kind of adjacent area that, through the consulting team and the knowledge of this group, you might be able to bring that asset-heavy IT/OT integration to more of a retail scenario. So don't close your mind to it just because it's asset light. I think there's some innovation that can come through there.
Agree. The adjacency is definitely there, and it's just working through problem statements that you can rehash with those same core skill sets.
Now, on the mid-market side or mid-tier side, however we're describing it,
I'm going to call them the Future 500, because they're going to be the future Fortune 500.
I like it.
And then that's kind of aspirational for them.
We should launch that as a white paper then, get some credit for that now. So
I'm trademarking it at the moment.
I have been now at Hitachi for almost 3.5 years, and mid-market was not something I was particularly used to coming from a tier 1 provider. So when I got here on day 0, mid-market was something that was preached to me when I was reviewing a lot of the industry's work. And I don't think that the market was talking about mid-market until about 2 years ago. And so that tells me that we were in a good spot, and we're probably in a better spot now. But are you, what's been some of the vendor thought process that mid-tiers have been going through? Has it been we need to use a tier one because our tier one, our large enterprise is using one? Or has it been, I don't know who to use, or I'm going to stick with vendors who I know I'm going to get the A team when I knock on the door because they're a smaller one?
Rakesh has run 3 mid-tier deals in the last 12 months, so I'll let him tackle that one first.
It's an easy answer. Exactly what you said. Big enough to deliver, but small enough to care. So they're absolutely not looking at tier one as the primary choice. They're looking at the market to say, who will provide us the A team? Who will provide us the care and attention that we deserve? Treat us as a strategic partner and take us through the journey. And that's really what our clients are looking for. And that's synonymous with all the 3 deals that Ant mentioned that we've run, where that's been one of the key facets. So one of the things that we've often found is a lot of the tier ones have the capability, but they also have 50 other clients who are bigger than the conversations we're at. So it's not about the 100+ million deals, but it's about the 20 million transactions, ACVs, where the clients are turning to the providers and saying, guys, if we are not in your top 5 or 10, do we really want to work with you? And that's the first challenge. And most tier ones are not able to convince them beyond that. So we are seeing a big traction where providers, with sizable scale, providers like you, 500 million plus, are still really big in size and scale, can deliver, but provide the A team, provide the care and attention, and provide that cultural alignment piece as well, which is so important with your nearshore locations to make things happen on the ground. And that's what the clients are looking for.
So when we're talking with clients, mid-market clients, I mean, it's no surprise to anyone. We run this thing called ISG Provider Lens. They're quadrant reports. It says, are you a leader, or a product challenger, a market challenger? There's a nuanced discussion that we have with our clients, which says, okay, maybe this tier one is a leader, but your probability of getting the tier one A team is whatever. You're more likely to get the tier one D team, E team, maybe. It goes A to Z, whatever.
Yeah.
But a Hitachi A team that you get is going to be better than the tier one D team. So just because they're in a different sector of the quadrant doesn't mean they're not the right partner for you. And then the way that we work our transaction process is very, very high touch. And I'm sure there's people here who get to be part of them, because we go through these kind of co-solutioning workshops from the very beginning, set out what we're trying to achieve, what the client's trying to achieve, bring the best of the people together to say, well, how can we think about this problem? How can we change what we're doing? How can we drive some innovation? That's where the Hitachi A team starts to differentiate against the tier one D team.
Sure.
Because you're able to say, well, these guys are brilliant. They may be smaller, but that's the team I'm going to be working with the next 3 years, for the next 5 years. It's tough when you're in a delivery resource to be when you're in a delivery organization to be part of those conversations, because you've got to kind of get out of your day-to-day role, but it can be so critical to actually winning those deals.
So we'll go back and we'll end before we take some questions to the parked car, which is AI. So what's
that?
I don't know anymore, to be honest with you. I just have to go on LinkedIn and I'll see it there. But what's the latest in EMEA with AI, if anything?
Not very much happening. No. So AI budgets are increasing exponentially. We run a state of the market on AI report each year, very in depth, very detailed, looks across the entire piece. There's a couple of things that are coming to the forefront. The number one thing when we ask clients, what would you do differently if you were to go back and do again? What do you realize that you made a mistake? Interestingly, it's not there was a lack of investment. It tells me that clients are spending enough money on it at the moment.
Sure.
They said there's a lack of governance on it. So that says that they don't have appropriate governance around what are the use cases that I should consider or could consider, what are the use cases that I will consider and will actually put money behind. And so that the kind of the focus for a lot of our clients is how can we improve the governance around it?
Sure.
This team, great ideas that come up. How can you help your client to understand this is a high yield use case versus maybe a low probability one? Obviously, we're 2 days after the announcement of DeepSeek. Fundamentally has changed. World changed. NVIDIA dropped, what was it, 16% in a day?
600 billion or something.
$500 billion written off their market cap. They came back the day after. I'm not going to be brave enough to sit here and say I know where this thing's going in the next 6 months. But if DeepSeek really has transformed how you're able to train models and the resources that you have to apply to it, it's going to further democratize AI and mean that some of those use cases that we talked about before, which
and open source is key to that.
And open source is key to that. The accessibility of it. It's going to say that those use cases which may have been prohibitively expensive before, maybe there's more of a value case to be made for them.
Yeah. No, and I think just to bolt on, if you just look at it from a IT lens, right, in terms of what we're seeing in the IT operations space, roughly 4% of the budget was spent on Gen AI last year. We expect it to go up to around 6%.
6 or 7.
6.5% this year. So there's a big increase in generative AI spending in the market. That's point one. Right?
It's not just Gen AI, it's agentic AI. It's helping make those decisions, take the actions on the back of it.
So a lot of the escrows created from some of the cost optimization are being focused totally now on AI. Really.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of our work is taking cost out for our clients so that they can go and invest in these more transformative ideas. Because, that's what we want to be doing. We want to do the cool stuff.
Yeah.
We don't want to spend time and money doing day-to-day bog standard.
Yeah.
So, and if you break that down further, and it's a free report, you should definitely Google ISG1 generative AI.
It's been shared internally.
Perfect.
For sure.
Very good.
Yeah.
So 36% of the spend is going towards applications, right? Gen AI applications, including software as a service. Roughly 25% is being spent on personnel, with the remaining being spent on infrastructure and managed service. And that's an interesting observation in itself, which says 25% is being spent on personnel, which is quite high. And that's only because there's a talent shortage of Gen AI engineers in the market. And I think that's what clients are struggling with. So if you actually, take a step back and say, how many of the initiatives are actually in production? It's only been 15% of Gen AI initiatives which are in production. That tells you there's a lot that's happening behind the scenes. And a lot of tactical
when we run the report again this year, that number's going to be much higher, though.
I'm sure it is.
You made a good point though about talent shortage. I feel like I've been hearing that for a long time as these technologies that keep being the big story, blockchain, IoT, cloud, whatever it might be. It seems like talent shortage is going to be a perpetual problem if this technology is going to move faster and faster.
Technology is moving so fast that the training has to keep up at such a pace.
And which never ever happens. So
well, it's a great opportunity for you to differentiate with the training programs that I know that you have.
Particularly our learning and development team here, which is doing a great job, trying to stay pace with that. But not every organization can keep up with that level for sure. So
requires a good amount of experimentation within this group as well.
And I think that's what the clients look for. They have factored in that there is a lack of data engineers, there's a lack of AI engineers, there's a lot of shortage of skills and talent. They have themselves not done the L&D that is required to empower and upskill their teams. And therefore, they are in the short term looking to providers like yourself to solve that talent gap. And I think that's a huge opportunity play that will be in the market for the next couple of years at least before they play catch up.
So there's one thing that clients consistently complain to me about, which is I never get any innovation out of my providers. And innovation doesn't happen at the senior exec level. It happens day to day when service delivery manager is working with the client. It happens when your data engineer is working with your client. It happens at all stages, all phases of the engagement. One of the things that over the last 12 months I've seen clients much more receptive to is a conversation of, hey, I don't know if this would work, but I've had this idea. And we're at the forefront of
Sure.
AI transformation, right? If anyone sat there saying, I know this is going to work for sure, then they're probably taking a bit of a simplistic view of it. But I think, as you think through how you both maintain and expand your client relationships, which is clearly what you want to do.
Sure.
Bringing that innovation on a day in, day out basis of, hey, I don't know if this would work, but I've had an idea and this might be how we would try it. It'd be a good approach to follow.
I think we're good.
Okay.
Well,
Fantastic.
it was a pleasure to have you here in Lisbon. Thank you to the ISG team for visiting us, and we look forward to continuing our relationship.
Fantastic.
Thank
you,
you
Patrick.
for being a wonderful host, Patrick.
Yeah.